The sun was hot that day, burning down on everyone, but Adora's words felt even colder. She looked at Yolena and said, "She can cry outside with the drivers." That one sentence cut deep. Yolena stood at the gate of the church, her eyes full of tears, her scarf soaked. Her heart was already broken from losing her father, but now this. She wasn't even allowed inside his funeral. She had dressed in black, just like everyone else. She had come to say goodbye, to mourn, but her stepmother treated her like a stranger, or worse, like she didn't exist. People noticed her standing there, but no one stepped in. Some turned their heads. Some whispered to each other, but no one offered a seat. No one offered a kind word. Inside the church, the funeral had already started. The priest was speaking. The choir was singing soft hymns. But Yolena stood alone at the gate, not welcome, not even as a daughter. The guards blocked her way. Her father was being laid to rest, and she was being left out like an outsider, all because Adora, his second wife, didn't want her there. Yolena didn't shout. She didn't argue. She just stood there in silence. Her tears kept falling. This was her father, the man who raised her, the man who held her when she cried as a child. And now she wasn't even allowed to sit in the back row. Some guests felt uncomfortable. They could see her pain. A few looked at Adora, hoping she would change her mind. But Adora sat straight-faced, pretending nothing was wrong. She had power now, and she used it to shut Yolena out. Yolena wanted to run, to scream, to fall to her knees. But she stayed strong. Even while standing under the sun, even while being humiliated, she kept her head up. She was hurting, yes, but something inside her told her this wasn't the end. Not yet. While the priest was still speaking inside, and the choir sang softly, a man in a dark, sharp suit walked quickly past the guards at the church gate. He didn't look confused or lost. He walked straight toward Yolena, who was still standing outside, quietly crying. "Miss Yolena Mbawe?" the man asked gently. Yolena wiped her face and nodded slowly. "I'm Mr. Aluko," he said with a small smile. "I'm your father's lawyer. He left special instructions for today." Yolena looked confused. "Instructions?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Yes," Mr. Aluko replied. "Your father wanted you to speak at the funeral, before anyone else." For a moment, Yolena couldn't believe what she had just heard. Her father had planned for her to speak. Even after everything, he had remembered her. Her heart beat faster. The guards at the door looked at each other. They were unsure. A few guests had noticed what was happening and had turned to watch. Whispers began to spread across the yard. "She's the daughter." The lawyer said her name. Why was she outside then? Mr. Aluko turned to the guards and said firmly, "Let her in. She has every right to be there." The guards stepped aside without a word. Yolena didn't rush. She took a deep breath and slowly walked through the doors. Each step felt heavy but strong. Her heels clicked softly on the floor. Her black dress brushed against the wooden pews. Heads turned. People whispered. The woman who had been pushed outside was now walking down the aisle. At the front, Adora's face froze. She had not expected this. Her eyes widened. Her lips pressed into a thin line. But she couldn't stop anything now. Yolena stood tall, though her heart was still aching. She looked at the crowd, then at her father's coffin, then finally at the microphone. She didn't look for pity. She didn't look for revenge. She had come to honor her father, and now she finally had the chance to speak. In that moment, the mood in the room changed. The guests who once ignored her now watched her closely. The silence was thick. No one dared to speak. Even the priest stepped back. Yolena had waited outside like she didn't belong, but now she was inside, right where her father had wanted her to be. And with that, she stepped forward, ready to speak. As Yolena walked to the front of the room, the sound of her footsteps echoed. Everyone had turned to look at her. The choir stopped. Even the priest went quiet. It felt like the whole room had paused, just to watch her. Yolena's eyes moved slowly across the faces in the crowd. Some were shocked, some were curious, and some looked guilty for ignoring her earlier. But she didn't focus on them. Her eyes locked onto one face, Adora. Adora sat stiffly in the front row, her eyes wide, her lips shaking. She wasn't smiling now. She looked like someone who had just seen a ghost. Her skin had lost its color. The confidence she had earlier, when she told Yolena to cry outside, was completely gone. She never expected Yolena to walk in like this, and she certainly didn't expect her to have the right to speak. Yolena walked calmly to the microphone. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply stood there with grace, holding her pain in quietly. She didn't want to fight. She just wanted to speak from the heart. She looked at the people in front of her, then turned her gaze to her father's coffin. Her voice was soft, but clear. Everyone could hear her. "He was my father," she said, pausing for a moment. "Before he was her husband." The room went completely still. Yolena turned slightly, looking back at Adora. "He taught me many things," she continued. "But one thing I never forgot was this. He said, never speak during a storm. Let it pass, then speak clearly." She paused again, this time longer. "So I waited," she said. "I waited for the noise to die down, for the lies to fade, for the silence to open a space. And now, it's my turn." You could hear people breathe in sharply. No one expected words so calm, so powerful. She wasn't shouting or blaming anyone, but somehow, her words hit harder than anger ever could. They carried truth, they carried pain, but they also carried strength. Adora didn't say a word. She looked frozen, like she couldn't believe what was happening. Her control over the moment was gone. Yolena stood there, her hands steady, her voice stronger now. The girl who had been kept outside was now speaking at the front, not as a guest, not as someone who begged to be there, but as a daughter, the only daughter. And in that moment, everyone knew this was no ordinary speech. This was the voice of someone who had waited in pain, waited in silence, and finally had the chance to be heard. After speaking her first few words, Yolena took a deep breath. The room was still completely silent. No one moved. All eyes were on her. Slowly, she reached into her small black purse and pulled out something, an old, folded piece of paper. The edges were worn, but the writing on it was clear. Everyone leaned in a little, curious. She held it up gently and said, "This is a letter from my father. He wrote it months before he passed." Some people gasped softly. Others looked at each other in surprise. Even the lawyer, Mr. Aluko, who now stood quietly beside her, nodded slowly, as if to say, "Yes, it's real." Yolena opened the letter and began to read in a calm, steady voice. In the letter, her father had written about his regrets, about not spending enough time with her after remarrying, about letting distance grow between them. He said he had made mistakes, but he wanted to fix them before it was too late. The letter wasn't bitter. It was full of emotion, real, raw, and loving. He called Yolena his first light, the daughter who made him proud from the very beginning. He wrote about how sorry he was for the pain she felt and how he wished he had stood up for her more when others tried to push her away. Then, her voice grew firmer. She read the part where her father said he had updated his will, quietly, carefully. He had made new decisions that he didn't share with everyone, not even Adora, not her son, not the guests. He had sent the new will directly to Mr. Aluko, his trusted lawyer, with one main instruction: let Yolena speak before anyone else at his funeral, and let her be the one to open the truth. Now people were no longer just curious, they were shocked. This wasn't just a daughter speaking from her heart. This was something bigger, something official, something serious. Yolena didn't look at Adora while reading. She didn't need to. She could feel her stepmother's fear growing with every word. She knew Adora didn't expect this. She thought she had everything in control. But now, it was slipping away, in front of everyone. When Yolena finished reading, she folded the letter again with care and held it close to her chest. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. But the power in her hands was clear. She turned slightly toward Mr. Aluko. He gave a slow, respectful nod, confirming everything Yolena had just said. And just like that, the room realized this funeral wasn't just about goodbye. It was about truth, and the truth was finally coming to light. After Yolena finished reading the letter, she stepped aside. Mr. Aluko, the lawyer, moved forward with a brown folder in his hands. He opened it slowly and cleared his throat. Everyone turned their eyes to him, waiting. He said, "This is the last will and testament of Mr. Emmanuel Mbawi." The room went completely silent again. Mr. Aluko began to read. "The house in the city," he said, "goes to my daughter, Yolena Mbawi." Gasps filled the room. People looked at each other in shock. Even the priest blinked in surprise. Adora's mouth dropped slightly. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her face turned pale. "The family land in Ikorodu," Mr. Aluko continued, "will be placed under the Yolena Light Foundation, a trust to help young girls who have no voice." More whispers spread across the room. This wasn't what anyone expected. Many had believed everything would go to Adora and her son. But now, it was clear. Mr. Mbawe had made a very different decision. Adora's hands began to tremble. She pulled out her handkerchief and dabbed her forehead. Her legs crossed and uncrossed. She looked at the guests, hoping someone would speak up, but no one did. Then came the final part. "My company shares," Mr. Aluko read, "are to be frozen and untouched until a video message from me is played." Right then, a man at the back of the room turned on a projector. A screen slowly dropped behind the casket. The light flickered, the sound clicked, and there he was, Mr. Emmanuel Mbawe, sitting in a chair, wearing a calm smile, speaking directly to everyone in that room. The moment his face appeared, people gasped again. Some covered their mouths, some leaned forward. Adora looked like the ground under her was breaking. Mr. Mbawe's voice echoed across the room. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means I'm no longer here. But there are things I need to say that I didn't say in life, things I regret, and things I must make right." His voice was calm, but heavy with emotion. Adora looked around in panic. Her hands clutched her bag tightly. She didn't know what was coming next, but she knew it wasn't going to be good for her. Everyone's eyes stayed on the screen. No one looked away. This wasn't just a video. It was a message from the grave, and it was about to change everything. And in that moment, Yolena didn't have to say another word. Her father was finally speaking for her. The video played on the screen behind the casket, and everyone watched closely. Mr. Emmanuel Mbawe, Yolena's father, sat in a quiet room, wearing a simple shirt. His face looked tired but peaceful, like he had made peace with himself. He looked straight into the camera and began to speak. "I have made mistakes," he said softly, "and my biggest one was letting distance come between me and my daughter, Yolena." The guests listened in silence. Some were already wiping their eyes. "She deserved better," he continued. "I failed her once in life, but I won't fail her in death." That sentence hit hard. People looked at Yolena, who stood silently, holding back tears. Her hands were clasped, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Some people," Mr. Mbawe said, "took advantage of my silence. They used my weakness to push her away. They lied, they controlled. But today, the truth comes forward. And to those who tried to erase my daughter from my life, this is your reckoning." That's when the room changed. Adora, sitting at the front, dropped her handkerchief. It slipped from her hand without her noticing. Her face turned red. Her hands shook. She looked around the room, embarrassed and afraid. The strong woman who once told Yolena to cry outside now looked small and exposed. People started whispering. "She knew all along. I thought they were close. Look at Yolena, poor girl." Even Adora's own son, who had been sitting beside her, slowly leaned away from her. He didn't say a word, but the look on his face said everything. He looked shocked. He looked betrayed. Mr. Mbawe's voice continued, calm but firm. "I built everything I had with hard work, and I leave it now in the right hands. Not to reward lies, but to honor love." Yolena's chest rose and fell. She didn't need revenge. This moment was enough. Her father had spoken the words she had waited years to hear, not in private, but in front of everyone. The video slowly faded to black. Silence followed, heavy, powerful silence. No one moved, no one clapped. They just sat there, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Adora didn't speak. She couldn't. Her eyes stared forward, but her world was clearly falling apart inside. And Yolena, she didn't smile. She didn't show pride. She just stood tall, quietly, with the strength of someone who had finally been seen and finally heard. After the video ended, everyone was still silent. The air in the room felt heavy. Eyes shifted between Yolena, Adora, and the lawyer. Then, Mr. Aluko, the lawyer, stepped forward once more. This time, he was holding a small wooden box. He gently handed it to Yolena, saying, "Your father left this for you." Yolena looked down at the box, unsure what was inside. Slowly, she opened it. What she saw made her eyes widen. Inside were papers, small tapes, and a worn-out journal. These weren't just memories. They were proof of what had been happening behind closed doors. She picked up the first paper. It was a receipt for a large amount of money that had been taken from her father's account and sent to someone unknown. Then there were more papers, with her father's signature. But as Yolena looked closely, she noticed the handwriting wasn't the same on all of them. Some were clearly fake. Mr. Aluko explained, "These are documents showing forged signatures. Your father discovered that some of his decisions were made without his real permission. He was manipulated. The room buzzed with quiet shock. People whispered again. A few guests leaned forward to get a better look. Then Yolena opened the journal, page after page. Her father had written down moments when he felt pressured, confused, or left out of his own life. He wrote about how Adora often told him that Yolena didn't care, that she had moved on, that she didn't want a relationship with him anymore. But those were lies. Adora had told him those things to create space, to pull him away from his daughter. She wanted full control. She wanted the wealth, the house, and the name. And the best way to do that was by making sure Yolena was no longer part of the picture. There were even small recordings. One played right there in the room, a hidden conversation where Adora spoke about keeping the girl out of the family's business. Her voice was cold and clear. "I'll make sure she's gone for good," the recording said. "He trusts me too much." Gasps spread across the room. Adora looked down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Her face had gone pale. Her hands gripped the sides of the chair. Her lies were no longer hidden. Yolena didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply closed the box and held it close. These weren't just papers and tapes. They were the truth. All the pain she had carried in silence now had proof to back it. And now the world knew. Every guest, every friend, every family member, they knew what really happened. And Yolena? She finally had everything she needed, not for revenge, but for peace. After everything came out, the letter, the will, the video, and the hidden evidence, everyone looked at Adora differently. But Yolena didn't raise her voice. She didn't go to the police. She didn't file any charges. She simply stood in silence, full of quiet strength. People asked her later, "Aren't you going to take her to court?" She shook her head and said, "I don't have to. The truth already did." And she was right. The news of what happened at the funeral spread quickly. Everyone in the community heard about it. People who used to support Adora, who smiled with her and attended her fancy parties, stopped calling. They didn't want to be seen with someone who had lied, manipulated, and tried to erase a daughter from her own father's life. The charity board, where Adora held a big position, didn't waste time either. A week after the funeral, they removed her name from all rolls. Her seat on the board was gone. Her name was removed from event banners. She was replaced without a second thought. Even her son, who once followed everything she said, pulled away from her. After the truth came out, he felt confused and ashamed. He realized the woman he trusted had built everything on lies. One evening, he quietly packed a bag and left the house without saying a word. Adora called him. He didn't pick up. She texted. He never replied. She sat in the big living room alone, waiting for someone to come back, but no one did. The house that once felt full now felt empty. And the worst part, the house no longer even belonged to her. It was now legally in Yolena's name. But Yolena didn't rush to kick her out. She simply sent a legal notice through the lawyer, giving her time to leave. No shouting, no drama, just quiet steps toward justice. Neighbors who once greeted Adora with smiles now crossed the street to avoid her. Shopkeepers who once praised her now lowered their voices when she walked by. She had become a stranger in the very place she once ruled. Yolena never gloated. She never laughed at Adora's downfall. She had already moved on, not just from the pain, but from the need to prove anything. Her silence spoke louder than any courtroom ever could. Sometimes, justice doesn't come from a judge or police. Sometimes, it comes from truth finally being seen, from people finally understanding what really happened, and from the very people who once believed lies, choosing to walk away from them. Adora had tried to take everything: love, money, power. In the end, she lost the one thing she never expected to: control. And Yolena, she walked away with her peace. A few days after everything had settled, Yolena knew it was time to leave the city. The house was now hers. The truth had been revealed, and the people who once doubted her had seen everything with their own eyes. But before she left, there was one last thing she needed to do. Early in the morning, when the streets were still quiet and the sun had just started rising, Yolena walked to the cemetery. She held a single sunflower in her hand, her father's favorite flower. It reminded her of his warm smile, the way he used to lift her high in the air when she was a child, and the way he called her his sunshine. She reached his grave and stood there for a while, saying nothing. The stone was simple, just his name and the dates. But for Yolena, it meant much more than that. It was a place where she could finally say goodbye, not in sadness, but with peace in her heart. She knelt down, gently placed the sunflower on the fresh soil, and rested her hand on the grave. Her voice was soft as she whispered, "I cried outside, Papa. They made me wait at the gate, but I walked in, and I stood strong." A tear rolled down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from pain, it was from healing. She smiled a little and added, "Thank you for finally opening the door." The wind blew gently, as if the world had heard her. She stood up slowly, looked around the quiet cemetery, and felt lighter. Not because everything was perfect, but because the weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. Her father had done what she had always hoped he would. He had seen her, believed in her, and given her the place she deserved. Yolena took one last look at the grave, then turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her goodbye had been said, and her heart was ready to start again. That visit wasn't about sorrow. It was about closure. It was about knowing that even though she was once pushed out, she found her way back in. And more importantly, she stood with dignity, spoke her truth, and honored her father with grace. She left the cemetery quietly, her steps calm, her face peaceful. She didn't need a crowd or applause. All she needed was that moment and the strength to move forward. After everything was over, Yolena didn't stay in the city to enjoy the house or the attention. She didn't host parties or give interviews. She didn't even respond to the people who suddenly wanted to be close to her. She simply packed her things and left, quietly, just like she had arrived. She moved to a new town, far from the drama and whispers. There, she began something special. In her father's name, she started a scholarship for young girls who had been pushed aside, silenced, or ignored, just like she once was. The scholarship was for girls with no voice, girls who needed a chance to be seen, heard, and believed in. She didn't do it for praise. She didn't put her name on big banners. Instead, she sat with each girl who applied. She listened to their stories. She gave them hope. Yolena began to speak at schools and events. At first, people invited her because of what happened at the funeral, but soon they listened to her because of the strength in her words. She didn't speak loudly. She didn't try to impress, but her voice carried something powerful, something real. In every boardroom she entered, in every classroom she visited, she carried the memory of that one painful day, the day she was told to cry outside, the day she stood by the gate with no seat, no support, and no welcome. And yet that same day became the reason she found her voice. Her story became her strength. She often told young girls, "You may be pushed out now, but that doesn't mean you don't belong." Sometimes, the ones outside the door are the ones meant to walk through it first. She never spoke badly of Adora. She didn't share the videos or the journal pages with the public. She let the truth rest where it needed to. Her healing wasn't about revenge. It was about growth. Over the years, many of the girls she helped became strong women, teachers, leaders, creators. And every time one of them succeeded, it felt like another quiet eulogy. Not the kind you say in words, but the kind you live through your actions. Yolena never needed a crowd to clap for her. Her biggest victory was walking in with grace when she had every reason to scream. Her greatest honor wasn't a title or a trophy. It was giving other girls a chance to rise, just like she did. And so, her father's legacy lived on, not through grand speeches or public praise, but through her quiet strength, her kind heart, and the many lives she touched. Some eulogies aren't spoken in front of a microphone. Some are lived every single day. And Yolena, she lived hers with purpose.